Christmas dinner was loud until my mom raised her glass and turned me into the punchline. She laughed, asking when I would settle down now that my sister had bought a house. Everyone waited for me to shrink. But I just smiled. I had already settled down, just not in a life they could take credit for. When my sister called me a liar, I slid one small envelope across the table, and her perfect house started collapsing in real time. My name is Juliana Walker, and I am 29 years old. In the grand unwritten script of my family, I was cast as the supporting character roughly 2 decades ago, and I have played the role with the kind of dedication that usually wins awards. I was the backdrop. I was the static noise. I was the benchmark for mediocrity against which my sister, Kelsey, could measure her dazzling, curated success. But scripts can be rewritten, even if you have to burn the original production down to do it. The air in the suburbs of Columbus, Ohio, was biting that night. It was the kind of cold that snaps against your skin and reminds you that you are alive. A sharp contrast to the numbness I usually felt when I pulled into the driveway of a family gathering. This year was different, though. This year, we were congregating at the shrine of Kelsey's latest achievement. It was a new build in a development that had sprung up from a cornfield just 6 months prior. The house was a towering monument to beige siding and black shutters, looking exactly like the 3 houses to its left and the 4 houses to its right. It was perfect. It was soulless. It was exactly what my mother, Darlene, believed happiness looked like. Inside, the air smelled aggressively of cinnamon pine cones and roasted meat. Kelsey had decorated with the ferocity of someone trying to win a competition that no one else knew they were entering. Every surface was covered in garland or fake snow. There were hand-lettered signs in cursive font placed strategically on the mantel and the entryway table, screaming phrases like "Merry Bright" and "Home for the Holidays." It looked less like a home and more like a showroom for a mid-range furniture store, the kind where you are afraid to sit down because you might wrinkle the illusion. Shoes off. Kelsey chirped the moment I stepped through the door. She didn't say hello. She just pointed to the engineered hardwood floors that gleamed under the recessed lighting. "We don't want to track salt in. It's impossible to get out of the grain. Merry Christmas to you too." "Kels," I said, unzipping my boots. She was already turning away. Her blonde hair perfectly waved, her outfit a coordinated ensemble of cream and gold that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget used to be. "Mom is in the kitchen. Make sure you compliment the backsplash." She helped me pick it out. I walked into the main living area, a vast open-concept space that echoed with the chatter of aunts, uncles, and cousins. The noise was overwhelming, a cacophony of forced cheer and subtle bragging. I navigated through the crowd, offering tight smiles and non-committal nods. I knew the drill. I was the ghost at the feast. I was there to fill a seat, to round out the numbers, and to provide a stark contrast to the golden child. My mother was holding court at the kitchen island, a glass of Chardonnay in one hand and a serving spoon in the other. She looked radiant, fueled by the vicarious triumph of her eldest daughter. When she saw me, her smile didn't reach her eyes. It never really did. It was a smile of obligation, the kind you give to a neighbor you don't particularly like but have to tolerate because of the property lines. "Juliana," she said, her voice carrying over the din. "You made it. We were worried you might have car trouble again. You know how unreliable that little sedan of yours is." It was a small dig, a casual reminder of my perceived status, delivered before I had even taken off my coat. "My car is fine, Mom," I said, my voice steady. The traffic was just heavy coming out of the city. "Well, you're here now," she said, turning back to the oven. "Grab a drink, but use a coaster. Kelsey just got these counters sealed." Dinner was a performance art piece. We sat at a long dining table that had been extended to its maximum length, covered in a white tablecloth that felt stiff with starch. The china was new, the silverware was heavy. I sat near the end, flanked by a cousin who was too busy texting to speak, and an uncle who only wanted to talk about gas prices. I ate quietly, cutting my turkey into precise, manageable squares. I watched them. I watched how they looked at Kelsey. They looked at her with a mixture of adoration and envy, feeding her ego with every compliment about the crown molding and the square footage. Kelsey soaked it up, her laughter ringing out a little too loudly. her gestures a little too wide. She was in her element. She was the queen of the suburbs, and we were her loyal subjects. Then came the moment I knew was coming. The toast. The clinking of a spoon against a wine glass cut through the conversation. It was a sharp, piercing sound that brought the room to a hush. My mother stood up at the head of the table. She smoothed the front of her red velvet dress and beamed. She looked around the table, her gaze lingering on Kelsey with a look of pride so intense it was almost palpable. "I just want to say," Darlene began, her voice trembling with emotion, "how incredibly happy I am to have everyone here. It has been such a big year for our family." She paused for effect. I took a sip of water. I knew the script. "Specifically," she continued, raising her glass higher, "for my beautiful Kelsey, to see her standing in her own home, a home she bought with her own hard work, just makes a mother's heart burst. She has built a life here, a real life. She has roots now." A chorus of "here," "here," and polite clapping rippled through the room. Kelsey lowered her head in a mockery of modesty, smiling that triumphant smile that she had perfected in high school. Then, Darlene turned. It was a slow pivot, like a turret on a tank acquiring a new target. Her eyes found me at the end of the table. The warmth vanished from her face, replaced by that familiar, pitying amusement. The room went silent. They knew this part of the script, too. This was the part where Juliana gets reminded of her place. "Your sister bought a house," Darlene announced, her voice rising in a pitch that walked the line between a joke and an accusation. "It is just wonderful. But it does make me wonder. Juliana." She leaned forward slightly over the table. "When will you settle down?" The question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. It wasn't a question. It was an indictment. It was a public shaming wrapped in the guise of maternal concern. A few relatives chuckled nervously. My uncle cleared his throat. I didn't look down at my plate. I didn't shift in my seat. I didn't feel the familiar heat of embarrassment creeping up my neck. For the first time in 29 years, I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, crystalline clarity. Kelsey, emboldened by our mother's opening shot, decided to fire the second volley. She leaned back in her chair, swirling her wine, looking at me with eyes that shone with malice. "Yeah, Jules," Kelsey said, using the nickname I hated. "I mean, you're still living in that apartment complex, right? The one with the shared laundry." "It has in-unit laundry," I said softly, though nobody was really listening. "Whatever." Kelsey waved a hand dismissively. "Point is, it's temporary. You're still living that temporary lifestyle, right? Drifting around, no roots, just existing." She looked around the table, inviting everyone to join in the joke. "I mean, look at this place. This is stability. This is what being an adult looks like. When are you going to stop playing pretend and actually build something?" Kelsey smiled. It was the smile of a victor standing over a defeated opponent. She expected me to crumble. She expected me to mumble an excuse about the housing market or my career, to make a self-deprecating joke and retreat into silence. That was the dynamic. That was the law of the Walker family. But I wasn't playing by their laws anymore. I looked at Kelsey. I looked at the crown molding she was so proud of. I looked at my mother, who was waiting for me to apologize for my existence. I placed my fork down on the edge of my plate. It made a soft, deliberate click. I didn't force a smile. I didn't grimace. I just let a genuine, small smile touch the corners of my lips. It was the smile of someone who knows the end of the movie while everyone else is still trying to figure out the plot. I looked directly at my mother, then at my sister. My voice was not loud, but in the silence of that dining room, it sounded like a gavel striking a sounding block. I already did. I said, the confusion on my mother's face was immediate, her brow furrowed. What I already settled down. I repeated, my voice even and cool. I bought a house 2 years ago. I have roots. I have stability. I paused, letting the words land, watching them struggle to process the information. Then I delivered the rest. I just didn't invite anyone who doubts me. The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavy and thick. Forks hovered halfway to mouths. My uncle stopped chewing. The air in the room seemed to be sucked out, leaving a vacuum where their assumptions used to be. My mother blinked rapidly, her brain trying to reconcile the daughter she thought she knew with the woman sitting before her. "Don't be ridiculous." "Juliana," she snapped, her laugh nervous and brittle. "You're making things up to sound important. This isn't the time for your little dramas." "She's lying," Kelsey said, her voice sharp, losing its polished edge. She slammed her wine glass down a little too hard. "She's obviously lying. You can't afford a house. You work in whatever that computer thing is you do. You're renting. We know you're renting. Believe what you want," I said, picking up my wine glass and taking a slow sip. It was a cheap Merlot, acidic and dry. "But facts don't require your belief to be true." "Stop it," Darlene hissed. "You are ruining your sister's night. Why do you always have to make everything about you? I bought a house. Please. With what money you need to apologize to Kelsey for trying to steal her thunder with these lies." "I'm not lying," I said, reaching into my purse which sat on the floor beside me. "Then prove it," Kelsey challenged, her face flushing a blotchy red that clashed with her cream outfit. "Prove it, or shut up and admit you're jealous." I pulled out a small, white envelope. It was standard size, unassuming. Inside was a single piece of paper, folded into thirds. I didn't throw it. I didn't wave it. I simply slid it across the smooth, polished surface of the table. It spun slowly, coming to a rest right between my mother's water glass and Kelsey's plate. "Go ahead," I said. My heart was beating in my chest. But it wasn't a frantic rhythm of fear. It was the steady, powerful thud of a war drum. If you have ever been the family joke, the punchline at every holiday dinner, the one they point to when they want to feel better about their own mediocre choices, then you know the heat that was burning in my chest. You know the desire to scream. But screaming is messy. Screaming is what they expect. I didn't want to scream. I wanted to dismantle. If you have ever been made to feel small by the people who were supposed to make you feel 10 feet tall, then pull up a chair, because that smile I gave them, that calm, terrifying smile, it didn't just appear out of nowhere. It wasn't a miracle. It was a fortress, and it was built, brick by painful brick, over 29 years of being pushed into the background. Let me tell you how I built it. To understand why I placed that envelope on the table with such a steady hand, you have to understand the geography of my childhood. We grew up in a split-level house on the edge of Columbus, a place where the grass was manicured to within an inch of its life, and the neighbors judged you by the cleanliness of your siding. In that house, there was a spotlight, and there was a shadow. My sister, Kelsey, lived in the spotlight. I was simply the person who operated the dimmer switch. Kelsey was the star. This was not an opinion. It was the household theology. She was blonde, bubbly, and possessed the kind of loud, infectious energy that people mistake for charisma. I was dark-haired, quiet, and possessed the kind of observational skills that people mistake for judgment. I remember a specific Tuesday when I was 14 and Kelsey was 16. It was a humid evening in late September. Kelsey had just made the varsity cheerleading squad. When she walked through the door, wearing that polyester uniform that cost my parents $300, the house erupted. My mother, Darlene, had ordered 3 extra-large pizzas and bought a sheet cake that said, "Go Kelsey" in blue icing. My father, Mark, was actually home before 6 in the evening. A rarity. Holding a camcorder to document her twirling in the living room. "Look at her," Mom shrieked, clapping her hands until her rings clicked together. "She is going to be the face of the school. Oh, Kelsey, you were born for this." I was sitting at the kitchen table, pushing a slice of pepperoni around my plate. Earlier that afternoon, I had won first place in a statewide essay contest. It was a serious competition, the kind that came with a certificate signed by the governor and a $50 savings bond. I had written about the industrial decline of the Midwest. It was dark, it was well-researched, and I was incredibly proud of it. When the cheering for Kelsey's high kick died down, I saw an opening. "Mom," I said, sliding my certificate across the Formica table. "I got the results back from the writing contest. I won first prize." Darlene looked at the paper for exactly 2 seconds. Her eyes scanned the fancy script, but her expression didn't shift. There was no cake. There was no camcorder. "That's nice, Juliana," she said, her voice dropping an octave, losing all the vibration it had held for Kelsey. "But why do you always have to write about such depressing things, industrial decline? It's so grim." Why couldn't you write about something happy like our summer trip to the lake? She didn't wait for an answer. She turned back to Kelsey, who was now showing off her pom-poms. Kelsey, honey, do that jump again for your dad. The one where your toes touch. That was the dynamic. Kelsey's achievements were public victories. Mine were private embarrassments. Kelsey was the protagonist. I was the background extra who was supposed to stay out of focus. My father was a ghost in his own home. Mark Walker worked long shifts at a manufacturing plant, leaving before the sun came up and returning when the news was on. He was a man worn down by the friction of manual labor and the relentless demands of a wife who wanted a country club lifestyle on a blue-collar budget. He wasn't cruel to me. He just wasn't present. He ceded all domestic authority to Darlene. If Mom said Kelsey was the golden child, Dad nodded and agreed, because it was easier than arguing. He paid the bills, ate his dinner, and fell asleep in the recliner. He was a wallet with a pulse, and I think part of me resented him even more than I resented Mom, because his indifference hurt more than her active dismissal. Darlene had a specific definition of success, and it was aggressively average. She wanted daughters who were pretty, popular, and married young to men with benefits packages. She viewed ambition in women as a defect, something that would scare away potential suitors. I heard her catchphrases so often they felt like tattoos on my brain. You need to be more realistic. Juliana, she would say when I talked about moving to a big city or working in tech. People like us don't run companies. We work for them. Or, if I expressed an opinion that was too sharp or too political at the dinner table. Don't be so intense. You'll scare people off. Boys like girls who are easy to be around. Stability is what matters for a girl. Not being right. Stability. That was her god. But it was a hollow version of stability, built on debt and appearances. There was only one person who saw the cracks in the foundation. My cousin, Tara Whitfield. Tara was my age, the daughter of Darlene's younger, wilder sister. Tara had messy hair, wore combat boots to Easter dinner, and had a radar for nonsense that was calibrated to military precision. She was the only one who didn't drink the Walker family Kool-Aid. One Thanksgiving, when I was 16, I was trying to tell the table about a coding boot camp I wanted to apply for during the summer. I had barely gotten 3 sentences out about Python and Java when Mom interrupted me. "Oh, that sounds very complicated." "Dear," she said, waving her fork dismissively. "Speaking of summer, Kelsey, tell everyone about the lifeguard job you got at the community pool. You're going to look so cute in that red suit." The table pivoted instantly. All eyes went to Kelsey. I felt that familiar lump in my throat, the one made of swallowed words and suffocated pride. I stood up and walked out the back door to the porch. The cold November air hit my face, drying the tears before they could fall. A minute later, the sliding door opened, and Tara stepped out. She didn't say anything at first. She just leaned against the railing next to me, her breath puffing out in white clouds. "They do that on purpose." "You know," Tara said flatly. "Do what I asked. Playing dumb. Change the channel," Tara said. "Every time you try to broadcast something real, Aunt Darlene changes the channel to The Kelsey Show. It's weird. It's like she's allergic to you being smart. She just wants me to be normal," I said, defending the woman who had just silenced me. "No." Tara shook her head, looking at me with eyes that were too old for her face. "She wants you to be smaller. There is a difference. Don't you dare ask their permission to be proud of yourself. Jules, if you wait for them to clap, you will die waiting." That conversation planted a seed. It didn't bloom overnight, but it took root. I realized that fighting for attention was a losing battle. If I spoke up, I was seeking attention. If I stayed quiet, I was moody. There was no winning move on their game board. So, I stopped playing. I developed a strategy of strategic invisibility. At family gatherings, I became the master of the kitchen sink. As soon as the meal was over, while Kelsey sat on the sofa receiving compliments and Mom poured wine, I would retreat to the kitchen. I washed every dish. I dried every glass. I scrubbed the pans until my knuckles were red. Relatives would drift in and say, "Oh, Juliana, you're such a help," but they wouldn't stay. They would go back to the laughter and the light. I preferred the hum of the dishwasher. It was a valid excuse to not speak. It was my armor, If I was working, I couldn't be criticized. I learned to answer questions with the fewest words possible. How is school? Fine. Seeing anyone? No. What are your plans? Working on it. I gave them nothing to grab onto, nothing to twist, nothing to mock. I became a gray rock, but the most painful lessons were financial. In the Walker house, money was a fluid concept. It was scarce when I needed it, but abundant when Kelsey wanted it. When Kelsey was a senior, she went through a breakup. It wasn't a tragedy. They had dated for 2 months, but Kelsey threw herself onto her bed and wept for 3 days. To cheer her up, Mom dipped into the family emergency fund and gave her $500 to go on a weekend shopping trip to Chicago with her friends. She's so stressed. Mom told me when I asked about it, she needs a release. It's good for her mental health. 6 months later, I was accepted into a prestigious summer program for data analysis. I needed $200 for the registration fee. I had saved half of it from babysitting, but I needed the rest. I brought the brochure to Mom, explaining how this could help me get scholarships later. Darlene put her checkbook down and gave me a stern look. Juliana, we are tight right now. You know that. Besides, if you want something, you should earn it. It means more when you stand on your own 2 feet. I'm not going to hand you everything. It creates entitlement. I stared at her. The hypocrisy was so bright it was blinding. Kelsey got $500 for retail therapy because she was sad about a boy named Kyle. I was denied $200 for an educational opportunity because it would make me entitled. I didn't argue. I didn't scream about the Chicago trip. I simply nodded, turned around, and walked out of the room. I sold my old bicycle and picked up extra shifts cleaning the neighbors' gutters to get the money. I went to the program. I excelled. And I never told Mom a thing about it. That was the turning point. That was when the anger solidified into something colder and more useful resolve. I realized then that I wasn't actually losing in life. I was smart. I was hardworking. I was resilient. I wasn't a loser. I was just cast in the role of the loser by a director who needed a foil for her star. My mother needed me to be the failure so Kelsey could be the success. She needed me to be the chaotic element, so she could feel like she had created order. I looked at my family, my exhausted father, my preening sister, my manipulative mother, and I saw them clearly for the first time. They were characters in a small, suffocating play, and I realized that I didn't have to be on their stage. I could build my own theater. As I stood over the sink that night, scrubbing a lasagna pan while laughter roared from the living room, I made a vow. I would take their advice. I would stand on my own 2 feet. I would be so independent, so stable, and so successful that one day their pity would choke them, but I would do it in the dark. I wouldn't show them my grades. I wouldn't show them my paychecks. I wouldn't show them my life. If they wanted me to be invisible, fine, I would disappear. And in that silence, I would build an empire they couldn't touch. By the time I graduated high school, I had perfected the art of the bland smile. I was already gone, even though I was still sleeping down the hall. They just didn't know it yet. They thought they were breaking me, but they were actually forging me. Everything that happened at that Christmas dinner, every word I said, every dollar I spent on that house they didn't know about, started right there, in the disparity between a cheerleading uniform and a writing award. The envelope I slid across the table wasn't just paper, it was 20 years of receipts. The summer before college was when the financial apartheid of the Walker household became official policy. It was no longer just about pizza parties versus saving bonds. It was about the trajectory of our lives being drawn in permanent ink. I had spent months researching universities. I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I had found a program that combined data analytics with marketing technology, a field that was exploding. It was rigorous, it was competitive, and it was at a university about 3 hours away, close enough to drive, far enough to breathe. I had the acceptance letter in my hand, the thick envelope that usually signals a celebration in normal families. When I laid it out on the dining table, outlining the tuition costs and the projected starting salary for graduates, Darlene didn't even put on her reading glasses. She just sighed, the long, weary sigh of a martyr being asked to carry one more cross. "It is very expensive. Juliana," she said, tapping a manicured fingernail on the tuition figure. "And for what computers you are going to spend 4 years staring at a screen." It's the future, Mom, I argued, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. The placement rate is 95%. This is a career. It's a lot of debt for a girl, she countered. And honestly, you have to think about the social aspect. You go to a school like that, everyone is going to be geeky. How are you going to meet anyone? You need to be thinking about a husband, not just a paycheck. A career won't keep you warm at night. Then came the pivot. It always came back to Kelsey. Now, we have looked at the state college 20 minutes from here for Kelsey, Mom said, her voice brightening instantly. It is a wonderful environment, great sororities. The campus is beautiful. We are going to cover her tuition and housing because we want her to have the full experience. It is an investment in her future network. I stared at her. So, you're paying for Kelsey to go to a party school, but you won't help me with a degree that actually pays. We are helping her settle, Mom said, her tone hardening. Kelsey needs a little more support. You have always been so independent. You like doing things the hard way. Besides, we can't afford 2 tuitions like that. You should be realistic. Realistic was her code word for know your place. So, I did it the hard way. I declined the offer from my dream school because I couldn't bridge the financial gap alone. Instead, I enrolled in a satellite campus of the state university that had a decent tech program. I didn't ask for a dime. I didn't ask for a cosigner. While Kelsey moved into a plush dorm room with a mini fridge and a matching duvet set funded by my father's overtime shifts, I moved into a basement apartment with 2 roommates and a mold problem in the bathroom. My life became a blur of caffeine and code. I woke up at 4:30 in the morning to open the local coffee shop. I spent 6 hours steaming milk and dealing with grumpy commuters before sprinting to class. My hands always smelled like burnt espresso beans and sanitizer. In the evenings, I worked retail at a clothing store in the mall. Folding denim until my fingers were raw and my lower back throbbed, I would come home at 10 at night, eat instant noodles, and study until 2 in the morning. I was exhausted. I was running on fumes. But there was a strange, jagged pride in it. Every A on a transcript, every paycheck that cleared, belonged to me. They were mine. Meanwhile, Kelsey was exploring every semester. It seemed like she had a new passion. First, it was fashion merchandising because she liked shopping. Then it was communications because she liked talking. Then it was interior design because she watched a lot of home renovation shows. She is just finding herself, Mom would say when I came over for Sunday dinner. My eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. It is important to sample different things. She is building a palette of experiences. She's wasting tuition, I muttered once, under my breath. She is living, Mom corrected me sharply. Not everyone wants to grind their life away like you. Juliana, you look tired. You're getting lines under your eyes. You should smile more. The gap between us widened until it felt like a canyon. I was learning SQL and Python. Kelsey was learning how to rush a sorority and mix the perfect margarita. And yet, in my mother's narrative, Kelsey was the one thriving. The breaking point, or perhaps the moment of absolute clarity, came during my junior year. I had landed a summer internship. It wasn't just any internship. It was a paid position at a logistics tech firm in downtown Columbus. I had beaten out 50 other applicants. It was the first real step on the ladder I had been building in the dark. I brought the news to a family barbecue. I was bursting with it. I thought, surely, this is tangible. This is a job. This is money. They have to respect this. We were sitting on the patio eating potato salad. My dad was nursing a beer, staring at the lawn. So, I started, trying to catch their attention. I got some news today. I was hired by Northbridge Solutions for the summer. It's a data analyst role. They're paying $20 an hour, which is huge for an intern, and if I do well, they usually hire full-time after graduation. I waited. I wanted a good job. I wanted a we're proud of you. Mom looked up from her plate. She chewed her coleslaw slowly. That sounds very technical. Juliana, just don't let it distract you from your appearance. You know, office lighting can be very harsh. Before I could respond, before I could defend the magnitude of what I had achieved, she turned her head toward the sliding glass door where Kelsey was walking out. Oh, speaking of good news, Darlene's voice went up 3 octaves. Everyone, Listen to this. Kelsey just met someone very special. Tell them, honey. Kelsey flopped into a chair, beaming. His name is Todd. He's 26. He works in commercial real estate. He drives a 5 Series. A BMW, Mom clarified for the table, as if the brand of the car was a character trait. And he comes from a very good family in Upper Arlington. He took Kelsey to a steakhouse for their second date. A real steakhouse, not a chain. He's so sweet, Kelsey gushed. He said he loves that I'm studying whatever I'm studying now. He says he wants a girl who knows how to enjoy life. See, Mom looked at me, her eyes gleaming with validation. That is what I mean about being positioned correctly. Kelsey puts herself out there. She attracts stability. A boy like that is a real future. My internship, my hard-won, $20 an hour victory evaporated. It was crushed under the weight of a stranger's BMW. I stood up. I couldn't breathe. I'm going to get some air, I said. I walked to the front of the house, standing by the driveway where my dented, 10-year-old Honda sat next to my parents' leased SUV. I was shaking. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was a hot, white rage. Tara found me there. She always did. She was smoking a cigarette she had hidden in her purse, leaning against my car. Let me guess. Tara exhaled a plume of smoke. You cured cancer, and Aunt Darlene interrupted you to talk about Kelsey's new boyfriend's watch. I got an internship, I said, my voice thick. A real one, and Mom acted like I told her I bought a hamster. She just wants Kelsey to marry rich so she can brag about it. Tara looked at me, dropping the cigarette and crushing it under her boot. You still don't get it, Jules. Get what? They aren't ignoring you because they think you're failing, Tara said, her voice low and serious. They ignore you because they are terrified you might be succeeding. If you actually make it big without their money, without their advice, without their connections, then it proves that Darlene is useless. It proves she's wrong. She can't handle that, so she has to pretend your wins don't exist. She grabbed my shoulders. They are afraid you are better than they think. Stop giving them ammunition. Stop bringing your trophies here to be smashed. That was the day the information iron curtain went up. I realized Tara was right. Every time I shared a success, I was handing them a weapon to use against me. I was inviting them to minimize me. So, I stopped. I went back to school, and I became a vault. When Mom called to ask how things were, I gave her nothing. School is fine, I would say. Just studying. I didn't tell her about the dean's list. I didn't tell her that my internship supervisor had already floated a job offer. I didn't tell her that I had started investing a tiny portion of my paycheck into an index fund. When I visited home, I dressed down. I wore my oldest jeans and hoodies. I let them believe I was struggling. I let them believe I was exactly where they wanted me to be drifting. Mediocre, unthreatening. It was a strange kind of power. I sat at the dinner table listening to Kelsey talk about Todd, who dumped her 3 weeks later, and her new major hospitality management, and I just nodded. Inside, I was calculating compound interest. Inside, I was building a roadmap out of Ohio. The climax of this era came at graduation. I graduated summa cum laude. I wore a gold cord that signified I was in the top 5% of my class. I walked across the stage, shook the dean's hand, and felt a profound sense of closure. My parents didn't come to the ceremony. Mom said it was too long and too crowded, and Dad had a shift he couldn't swap. I received a text message from Darlene at 2 p.m. Congrats on finishing. Let us know when you find a job. That was it. 4 years of sleep deprivation and grit. Acknowledged with a lowercase text. 2 weeks later, Kelsey quit her job as a receptionist at a salon because the manager was toxic, meaning he asked her to show up on time. She decided she was going to become a yoga instructor. Mom threw a party. There was a cake. There were balloons. To new beginnings. Darlene toasted, raising a glass to Kelsey's bravery in leaving a bad situation. It takes so much courage to prioritize your mental health, she said. I stood in the corner of the living room, holding a paper plate. I looked at Kelsey, who was glowing from the attention, completely oblivious to the absurdity of celebrating unemployment. I looked at my mother, who was so desperate to curate a perfect life that she was celebrating failure as a virtue. I felt the last tether snap. I realized then that I could become the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, and Darlene would still find a way to make it sound like a hobby. I could buy a mansion, and she would criticize the curtains. I didn't need their permission. I didn't need their applause. And most importantly, I didn't need them to know a single thing about the life I was about to build. I took a bite of the cake. It was dry. Fine, I thought, the vow cementing itself in my chest like a heavy stone. If you won't see me, I will create a place where you are forced to see me, but by the time you do, I will be so far above this house, you'll need a telescope to find me. I finished my cake, threw the plate in the trash, and walked out to my car. I had an interview in Charlotte the next morning, and I had a 6-hour drive ahead of me. I didn't say goodbye. I just started the engine. Crossing the state line into North Carolina felt less like a move and more like an exhalation. I had packed my entire life into the back of my Honda Civic, a Tetris stack of cardboard boxes and vacuum-sealed bags of clothes. I watched the landscape change from the flat, gray familiarity of Ohio to the rolling, green hills of the Piedmont, and with every mile marker that whipped past, the knot in my chest loosened just a fraction. I landed in Charlotte, a city that felt like it was under construction, much like I was. I rented a studio apartment in a complex that was technically in the city limits, but realistically 20 minutes from anything interesting. It was 600 square feet of beige carpet and laminate countertops. I had no sofa. I had no television. My furniture consisted of a mattress on the floor, a second-hand desk I bought off an online marketplace for $20, and a folding chair. To anyone looking in, it looked like poverty. To me, it looked like freedom. There was no one here to ask why I wasn't married. There was no one to compare my square footage to my sister's. There was just silence and the hum of the refrigerator. I started at Northbridge Signal Works on a Tuesday. The title on my offer letter was Junior Data Analyst, which is corporate speak for the person who fixes the spreadsheets that the executives broke. It was entry-level grunt work. I sat in a cubicle farm under fluorescent lights that hummed at a frequency that made my teeth ache. My coworkers were mostly guys in their mid-20s who spent their lunch breaks talking about fantasy football and crypto. I kept my head down. I wasn't there to make friends. I was there to build a war chest. The hustle became my rhythm. I arrived at the office at 7:30 in the morning, 30 minutes before the official start time, to run queries before the servers got bogged down. I stayed until 7 in the evening. While the other analysts were doing the bare minimum to not get fired, I was swallowing information whole. I realized quickly that the company was drowning in data, but starving for insights. The managers had millions of rows of sales numbers, but no idea what they meant. So, I taught myself. I spent my nights in that empty apartment, the blue light of my laptop illuminating my face, learning new visualization tools. I bought cheap online courses on advanced SQL and Tableau. I learned how to automate reports that used to take the team 3 days to compile manually. I built dashboards that turned chaos into clean, colorful charts. It was lonely. I won't lie and say it was a cinematic montage of glorious productivity. There were nights I ate peanut butter on toast for dinner because I was too tired to cook. There were Friday nights when I heard people laughing in the hallway, heading out to bars and clubs, and I felt a sharp pang of isolation. I was a 23-year-old woman living like a monk, but then I would log into my bank account, and the loneliness would recede. I had become obsessed with personal finance. I read every blog, every forum, every book on early retirement and financial independence. I treated my personal budget with the same rigor I applied to my company's data. I set up a system the moment my paycheck hit my direct deposit. Money was siphoned off before I could even see it. 15% went to my 401k to get the company match. Another 20% went to a high-yield savings account I nicknamed the Fortress. Another 10% went into low-cost index funds. I lived on the scraps. I lived as if I were making minimum wage. My coworkers went out for $12 salads every day for lunch. I brought leftovers in Tupperware. They leased new cars. I drove my Honda until the odometer rolled over 200,000 miles. And the phone calls. I can't forget the phone calls. My mother, Darlene, called me once a week, usually on Sunday afternoons. I learned to brace myself for these calls the way you brace for impact. "Hi, Mom," I would answer, forcing a brightness into my voice that I didn't feel. "Juliana," she would say, bypassing any pleasantries, "you will not believe what your sister is going through." 80% of our conversations were about Kelsey. It was like tuning into a radio drama where I was the unwilling audience. "She is just so stressed at the yoga studio." Darlene would sigh. "The owner expects her to actually clean the mats. Can you imagine Kelsey has sensitive skin? She reacts to those harsh chemicals. So, she quit. But don't worry, she is thinking about becoming a travel influencer. She has the look for it. Don't you think?" "That's an interesting idea," I would say, staring at my laptop screen where I was analyzing market trends. "She needs a new camera. Though," Mom continued, "a professional one. Those things are $2,000, but you have to spend money to make money. Right? Dad and I are going to help her out. It is an investment in her brand." I would bite my tongue until I tasted copper. An investment. They were pouring water into a bucket with no bottom. "How are you doing, Juliana?" she would ask eventually, usually as an afterthought when she needed to take a breath. "Still doing that computer work?" "Yes, Mom, it's going well." "And the apartment? Have you met any nice young men in the building?" "Mom, just working." "Well, don't work too hard. You sound dull. Honey, you need to have a life." Kelsey went to a winery last weekend and met a delightful attorney. "You should try to be more social." I stopped sharing. I stopped trying to explain that I had just automated a process that saved my department 40 hours of labor a week. I stopped trying to explain that I was on track to max out my Roth IRA for the year. I gave her the gray rock. Brief, polite, boring answers. I let her believe I was just getting by. I let her believe I was the dull, struggling daughter in the sad apartment. It was safer that way. If she knew I had money, the dynamic would shift. She wouldn't be proud. She would be entitled. Or worse, she would tell Kelsey. The contrast between my life and Kelsey's life was becoming a dark comedy. I followed Kelsey on social media mostly to keep tabs on the financial drain on my parents. Her feed was a curated exhibition of, "I deserve this." She posted photos of brunch with $20 mimosas. She posted haul videos of clothes she would wear once. She posted stories from weekend trips to Nashville and Miami. The caption was always something about self-care or living my truth. But I knew the back end of that truth. I knew it because Darlene would complain about it in code. We had to help Kelsey with her rent again. Mom would whisper, as if it were a secret we shared. "The landlord is being unreasonable about late fees. She just forgot. She has so much on her mind with her new brand." Kelsey was living a champagne life on a beer budget, my parents' beer budget. I was living a tap water life on a champagne budget. The pivotal moment came in December of my second year at Northbridge. I had been promoted 6 months prior. A quiet bump in title that came with a significant raise. I hadn't told my family, but the real shock came with the end-of-year bonus. The company had a record year. And because I had streamlined the reporting system, the VP of my division had taken notice. I was sitting at my desk when the notification popped up on my screen. A direct deposit. I clicked it open. I stared. $10,000. It was a 5-figure sum. Sitting there in black and white, after taxes, it was still more money than I had ever seen at one time. For a girl who used to scour the couch cushions for gas money, it felt like winning the lottery. My heart hammered against my ribs. I felt a surge of adrenaline so strong my hands shook. My first instinct, the one programmed into me by biology and culture, was to pick up the phone. I wanted to call my mom. I wanted to scream. Look at what I did. I'm good at this. I made $10,000 just for being smart. I actually picked up my cell phone. I unlocked the screen. I pulled up Mom in my contacts. My thumb hovered over the green call icon. And then, I heard her voice in my head. "That's nice, Juliana. But 10,000. Are you sure that's right? You know, Kelsey needs braces for her dog. It's going to cost about that much. It's so unfair how expensive vets are. Or worse. Oh, that's wonderful. Now you can come home for Christmas and maybe pay for the catering. It would be such a help since we bought Kelsey that car." I froze. I knew, with a certainty that was colder than the winter air outside, that this news would not be received as a victory. It would be received as a resource. It would be taxed, not by the government, but by the emotional economy of the Walker family. I lowered the phone. I locked the screen. I opened my banking app instead. I transferred the entire bonus, every single cent, into my brokerage account. I bought total market index funds. I didn't buy a purse. I didn't buy a plane ticket. I didn't even buy a steak dinner. I bought shares of the entire American economy. That night, I called Tara. Tara was the only leak in my vessel. She was living in Chicago now, working as a sous chef, grinding just as hard as I was, but in a hotter, louder environment. I sat on the floor of my apartment, a glass of cheap wine in my hand. I got a bonus, I told her. Yeah. Enough to buy a round of drinks, Tara asked, her voice raspy from a double shift. 10,000? I said. The line went silent for a full 5 seconds. Holy sh! Tara cut herself off. 10,000, Juliana. That's huge. I didn't tell them. I said, good, Tara said immediately. Don't you dare. If you tell Darlene, that money is as good as gone. She'll guilt you into loaning it to Kelsey for her next identity crisis. I put it all in the market. I said, you are a savage. Tara laughed, a warm, genuine sound that made the empty apartment feel less hollow. You're like a sleeper agent in your own life. They think you're a nobody, and you're secretly building a kingdom. It's not a kingdom yet, I said, looking around at my bare walls. It's just a savings account. It's freedom. Jules, Tara said softly, every dollar is a brick in the wall that keeps them out. We talked for an hour. We laughed about Kelsey's latest post, a photo of her meditating in a bikini that clearly cost $200. We talked about how tired we were, but it was a good tired. It was the exhaustion of ascent. When I hung up, I walked to the window and looked out at the Charlotte skyline. The city lights were blinking in the distance, a grid of electricity and ambition. I realized I had crossed a threshold. The desire for their validation had finally died. Starved by their indifference, it had been replaced by something far more potent: control. I wasn't waiting for them to notice me anymore. I wasn't waiting for the invitation to the table. I was building my own table, in a house they didn't know existed, paid for with money they didn't know I had. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the window. I looked tired. Yes, but I looked solid. I stopped explaining. I started building. It is a strange and pathetic thing, but hope is the last thing to die, even after the pizza parties I didn't get, the tuition I was denied, and the constant adoration of my sister's mediocrity. I still went home for Thanksgiving last year with a small, fragile ember burning in my chest. I was 28 years old. I was a senior analyst. I had just led a project that optimized our client retention strategy, resulting in a revenue increase of 12% for the quarter. In the corporate world, I was a rock star. I thought, perhaps foolishly, that if I brought a big enough win to the table, they would finally have to pull up a chair for me. I was wrong. The gathering was at my Aunt Linda's house that year. The air inside was hot and smelled of roasted turkey and heavy perfume. It was the kind of heat that makes your skin itch. The noise level was deafening, a mixture of football on the television and 3 different conversations happening at once. I sat in my usual spot, squeezed between a radiator and a cousin who chewed with his mouth open. I waited for my moment. I waited until the carving of the turkey was finished and the plates were being passed around. The conversation had lulled slightly as people focused on cranberry sauce and stuffing. So, Juliana, my Uncle Bob asked, waving a fork at me. Still doing the computer stuff down in Charlotte? It was dismissive, but it was an opening. I took a breath. I sat up straighter. Actually, yes, I said, projecting my voice so it would carry over the clinking silverware. It's going really well. I was actually just made the lead on a major project. My team redesigned a data model that saved the company about $200,000 in overhead this quarter alone. The VP of the department took me out to lunch to celebrate. I stopped. I looked around the table. For a split second, I saw genuine surprise on Uncle Bob's face. My cousins stopped chewing. It was a tangible achievement, a number they could understand. $200,000. That was real money. Then, Darlene cleared her throat. My mother was sitting across from me. She didn't look angry. She looked bored. She offered me a tight, polite nod, the kind you give a stranger who holds a door open for you. That is very nice, Juliana, she said. Work is important. She didn't ask a follow-up question. She didn't ask what a data model was. She didn't ask about the lunch. Instead, she turned her head 45 degrees to the right, where Kelsey was picking at a bread roll. But speaking of celebrating, Darlene's voice boomed with theatrical excitement. "Kelsey, show them the keys. You have to show them." Kelsey grinned, that wide, camera-ready smile that she turned on and off like a light switch. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a heavy black key fob with a silver logo on it. "I got a new car," she squealed. "It's a Range Rover, white with tan leather interior. It is literally my dream car." The table erupted. A Range Rover. Aunt Linda gasped. "Oh, honey, those are gorgeous. You must be doing so well. It's a lease," Kelsey said quickly, waving her hand. "But the payments are totally manageable. And honestly, I deserve it. The last few months have been so draining. I needed a sanctuary on wheels." "It suits you." Mom beamed, reaching over to squeeze Kelsey's hand. "You look like $1,000,000 in it. It shows people that you have arrived." I sat there, my fork suspended halfway to my mouth. My $200,000 of saved revenue had just been obliterated by a lease agreement on a vehicle that Kelsey undoubtedly could not afford without parental subsidies. The contrast was so stark it was almost funny. I had created value. Kelsey had acquired debt, and they were worshipping the debt. I lowered my fork. I shouldn't have said anything. I should have just let it go. But the ember of hope was flaring into irritation. "That's an expensive car." "Kels," I said quietly, "did you get a new job?" The table went quiet. The air temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Kelsey looked at me, her eyes narrowing. She dropped the smile. She leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand, looking at me with a mixture of pity and annoyance. "You know, Juliana," she said, her voice dripping with faux concern, "not everything is about the bottom line. You are always so obsessed with money and work. It's honestly a little sad. You did a good job at work. Okay, we get it. But don't you ever just want to live? You're acting like a robot. Beep boop, save money, work hard. Where is the joy? I have joy," I said, my voice tight. "I find joy in being secure. It's intense, is what it is." Aunt Linda chimed in, pouring more gravy on her potatoes. "You know, Juliana, I was telling Darlene just the other day, you are a very smart girl. But sometimes, being too smart, well, it intimidates people, especially men. A man wants to feel needed. If you're always talking about saving hundreds of thousands of dollars, what does he bring to the table? You have to soften up a bit. That's why Kelsey does so well socially. She makes people feel comfortable." I felt the blood drain from my face. It was a 1-2 punch. First, my sister called me a soulless robot for having a career. Then, my aunt told me my competence was a romantic liability. I looked at my mother, waiting for her to defend me, waiting for her to say, "Actually, Juliana is doing great, and we are proud of her independence." Darlene just took a sip of her wine and nodded. "Linda is right. Juliana, you do have a tendency to be a bit sharp. You could learn a little softness from your sister." I didn't finish my dinner. I pushed the turkey around my plate until it was a cold, gray mess. I realized then that I wasn't just fighting for attention. I was fighting a cultural war within my own bloodline. To them, a woman's value was decorative and dependent. My value was functional and independent. We were speaking different languages. The final nail in the coffin came on the drive back to my parents' house that evening. I had driven separately, but Mom's car had a flat tire, so I had to drive her home while Dad waited for the tow truck. It was just the two of us in my reliable, high-mileage Honda. The dashboard glowed green in the darkness. Darlene was scrolling through her phone, probably liking photos of Kelsey's new car on Instagram. "Kelsey is really doing well," she said, breaking the silence. "I know you worry about her, but she is very stable now." I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. "Mom, she leased a $60,000 car. She works part-time at a boutique. That isn't stability. That's math that doesn't add up." Darlene sighed, a sound of profound disappointment. "There you go again, always judging. Stability isn't just about a bank account. Juliana, it's about fitting in. It's about having a place in the community. Kelsey has friends. She has a look. She has a life that people admire. That is stability. She turned to look at me, her face illuminated by the passing streetlights. You know, your sister bought a house in her mind already. She has plans. When will you settle down? You're nearly 30. You're living in that apartment. You're alone. It's time you stopped trying to conquer the world and started trying to build a home. Settle down. The phrase hung in the air like exhaust fumes. In that moment, staring at the dark road stretching out ahead of me, something snapped. But it wasn't a loud snap. It was the quiet click of a lock engaging. I realized I had been entered into a race I never signed up for. And it was a rigged race. If I won, if I became successful, wealthy, and independent, I was cold, intimidating, and a robot. I was a threat to their worldview. If I lost, if I struggled or failed, I was a figure of pity. The disappointment compared to Kelsey's shine. There was no winning. There was only losing or being resented. Why was I trying to impress these people? Why was I bringing my hard-earned victories to an altar where they would only be sacrificed to Kelsey's ego? I looked at my mother. She wasn't a villain in a cape. She was just a small-minded woman who was terrified of anything she couldn't control or understand. She wanted me to be weak, so she could mother me. She wanted me to be less than Kelsey, so the family hierarchy made sense. I didn't say anything back. I didn't argue about the definition of stability. I didn't point out that I had a net worth that was likely higher than hers. You're right, Mom, I said, my voice hollow and flat. I should think about that. I dropped her off at the driveway. I didn't go in. I drove straight back to Charlotte that night, fueled by caffeine and a cold. Icy clarity. I was done. I was absolutely, irrevocably done. I was cutting off the supply. No more updates. No more sharing wins. No more seeking approval. If they wanted to see me as the struggling, lonely spinster, I would let them. I would let them paint whatever portrait of me they wanted, while I built a reality that would eventually shatter their entire gallery. My phone buzzed as I crossed the state line. It was Tara. She must have sensed the disturbance in the force, or maybe she just saw Kelsey's car post and knew I was spiraling, saw the rover. The text read, "Please tell me you didn't try to explain ROI to them." I typed back, "I tried. I failed. Mom told me I need to settle down." 3 dots appeared. Then Tara's reply came through. A message I would later write on a sticky note and put on my bathroom mirror. Her definition of settled is stuck. Your path doesn't need an audience. Jules, but keep walking. There will be a part of the road where you choose to turn on the lights, and they will be blinded. I threw the phone on the passenger seat. I formulated the plan somewhere on I-77 between the darkness of West Virginia and the lights of North Carolina. It was a long-term plan. It was a plan that required total secrecy. I would buy a house, not a starter home, not a condo, a sanctuary, a real estate portfolio. I would build wealth so undeniable that when the truth finally came out, it wouldn't be a discussion. It would be a revelation. But until then, I was going dark. Family access was officially revoked. I would attend the dinners. I would smile. I would nod. I would let them make their jokes. Let them think I'm losing. I thought as the Charlotte skyline came into view, let them think I'm the robot. Robots are very good at building things while the rest of the world sleeps. The promotion at Northbridge Signal Works didn't come with a balloon drop or a champagne toast. It came in a quiet email from HR on a Tuesday morning, attached with a PDF that changed the trajectory of my entire life. I had been elevated to senior data architect. The salary bump was significant, pushing me well into the 6 figures. But the real game changer was the equity package. I was granted 20,000 shares of stock options, vesting over 4 years. If the company went public, or if we were acquired, which was the rumor buzzing in the break room, those pieces of paper would be worth more than my parents' house. I celebrated in my usual fashion. I ordered Thai takeout, extra spicy, and transferred the entirety of my raise into my brokerage account. I was living a double life. By day, I was a high-powered tech strategist managing complex data infrastructures. By night, I was still the girl in the studio apartment who drove a dented Honda and scoured the internet for discount codes before buying toothpaste. I had a notebook on my desk, a simple black composition book. On the first page, I had written a single sentence, the house that nobody bought for me. Underneath, I tracked my net worth. The number was growing. It was moving from security to independence and inching toward untouchable. I wasn't just saving for a down payment anymore. I was saving for a fortress. I wanted to buy a home with cash. I wanted a deed with only my name on it. A piece of earth that no one could leverage, no one could criticize, and no one could claim credit for. Then came the notification that turned my quiet hustle into a cold sweat nightmare. It was a Thursday evening in October. I was sitting on my floor, folding laundry and listening to a podcast about market trends. My phone buzzed on the carpet. It wasn't a text or a call. It was a push notification from my credit monitoring app. New inquiry detected. Buckeye Harbor Lending has viewed your credit report. I frowned, picking up the phone. I hadn't applied for a credit card. I hadn't applied for a car loan. I certainly hadn't applied for a mortgage. I unlocked the app. There it was, in bright red text, a hard inquiry. Date today. Creditor Buckeye Harbor Lending. Location Columbus, Ohio. My stomach dropped. It felt like I had missed a step on a staircase. Buckeye Harbor Lending. The name sounded small, regional. It sounded like the kind of place you go when the big banks say no. I tapped the screen. My fingers suddenly cold. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe it was a glitch. I Googled the lender. They were a mid-sized mortgage broker based in the suburbs of Columbus. I didn't wait. I dialed their number immediately. It was 6 o'clock in the evening, and I prayed someone was still in the office. Buckeye Harbor Lending. This is Brenda speaking, a cheerful voice answered. Hi, Brenda, I said, my voice steady despite the rapid thumping of my heart. My name is Juliana Walker. I just received a notification that your firm ran a hard inquiry on my credit report. I haven't applied for any loans, so I'm concerned this might be fraud. There was a pause, the sound of typing, and then a hum of confusion. Oh, let me pull that up. Honey, Brenda said. Walker, do you have the last 4 of your social? I gave them to her. Okay, here we are, Brenda said. I see the application right here. It came in this afternoon. It's for a pre-approval on a mortgage modification and a secondary line of credit. I didn't apply for that, I said firmly. Well, are you sure? Brenda asked, her tone shifting from helpful to slightly patronizing. Sometimes people forget. It's listed here under a primary borrower, Kelsey Walker, with you listed as the co-borrower, authorized guarantor. The room spun. Kelsey, my sister. Read that back to me, I whispered. Who is the primary borrower? Kelsey Walker. Brenda confirmed. And the property address is, let's see, 1242 Maple Ridge Drive. I closed my eyes. I knew that address. I had seen it on the invitation to her housewarming party. I had seen it on the Zillow link my mother had sent me 6 months ago, bragging about the exclusive community Kelsey was moving into. Brenda, I said, my voice turning to ice. I did not authorize this. I am not a co-borrower. I am not a guarantor. If you proceed with this application, you are processing a fraudulent loan. Oh, Brenda said. The cheerfulness evaporated. Well, we have a signature here, electronic, of course, and we have your social security number, current address, and employer information. It looks very official. It is fraudulent, I repeated. Cancel the application, flag it, do not release any funds or approve any credit. I will have to speak to the loan officer, Brenda stammered. But if you're saying you didn't sign this, I didn't. And Brenda, I want a copy of that application sent to my email immediately for my police report. I hung up. I didn't wait for her to apologize. I sat there in the silence of my apartment, feeling a sensation I had never felt before. It wasn't just anger. It was violation. It was one thing for my mother to mock my career. It was one thing for my sister to call me a robot. But this was theft. This was them reaching into my pocket, into my hard-earned reputation, and trying to use it to prop up the facade of Kelsey's perfect life. I realized then that the settled life my mother bragged about Kelsey's house, the furniture, the image was a lie. Kelsey couldn't afford it. She likely had bad credit, maxed out cards, and a debt-to-income ratio that would make a banker weep. So, they needed a fresh host. They needed my pristine, 800-plus credit score to secure better rates or to get approved for more money. They were trying to use me as a financial mule. I didn't call my mother. I didn't call Kelsey. I knew exactly what would happen if I did. Darlene would gasp. She would say it was a misunderstanding. She would say, "Oh, Juliana, don't be dramatic. We were just seeing if we could get a better rate. We would have told you. We're family. What's mine is yours, right?" She would gaslight me until I felt guilty for protecting my own identity. Instead, I called Tara. They did what? Tara screamed into the phone. She was in the middle of a shift, and I could hear pans clanging in the background. They used my social to apply for a loan modification on Kelsey's house, I said, pacing my small living room. They tried to make me a co-signer without asking. That is a felony. Juliana, Tara said, her voice dropping to a serious, lethal register. That isn't a family squabble. That is federal crime territory. You need to lock it down, now. I want to call them and scream, I admitted. I want to drive up there and burn the house down. No, Tara commanded. Do not give them the satisfaction of your emotion. They thrive on drama. If you call screaming, they'll just call you crazy Juliana again. You need to fight this with paper. Be a surgeon, not a butcher. Cut off the blood supply. How? Freeze everything, Tara said. Lock your credit reports. File a dispute. Get the paper trail. And for the love of God, do not tip them off yet. If they know you know, they'll try to cover their tracks or guilt trip you before you have the evidence. I took her advice. I sat down at my computer and went to work. I logged into Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. I placed a security freeze on all 3 files. I set up fraud alerts. I downloaded the official inquiry report from Buckeye Harbor Lending. I created a digital folder named Evidence. Then, I started digging. How did they get my social security number? I hadn't lived at home in years. I guarded that number with my life. I searched my email archives. I searched for social security and mom, and there it was, an email from 3 years ago. Subject urgent. Insurance paperwork. From Darlene Walker. Hi, honey. Dad and I are updating our life insurance policies, and we want to list you and Kelsey as beneficiaries. I need your social security number for the forms. Can you send it over? Love, Mom. I remembered that email. I remembered replying. I'm not comfortable sending that over email. Mom, it's not secure. I'll call the agent directly if they need it. I clicked on my sent folder. Yes, I had refused. But then I saw another email. From a week later. Subject, found it from Darlene Walker. Never mind. Juliana, I found your old tax return in the attic from when you worked at the dairy bar in high school. I have the number. All set. I felt a chill run down my spine. She had kept my old tax documents. She had my number on file, and she had held on to it, waiting for a moment when it would be useful. I looked at the date of the credit inquiry again. It coincided perfectly with the time Kelsey had started posting about renovations and upgrades to her house. They weren't just disrespecting me, they were harvesting me, to them. I wasn't a person with boundaries. I was a resource to be mined. I was the backup generator for Kelsey's shining city. I sat back in my chair, the glow of the monitor illuminating my face. The sadness was gone. The desire to be loved was gone. What remained was a cold, hard resolve. I wasn't just going to fix my credit, I was going to set a trap. I printed the inquiry. I printed the email where my mother admitted to keeping my tax documents. I printed the dispute confirmation where I flagged the activity as identity theft. I put everything into a manila envelope. I realized then that the Christmas dinner coming up in 2 months wasn't going to be a family reunion. It was going to be a court date, and I was going to be the prosecutor. I picked up my pen and opened my notebook again. Underneath the house that nobody bought for me, I wrote a new line, the debt I will never pay. I closed the book. I didn't sleep that night, but I didn't cry either. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sirens of the city, and planning exactly how I would smile when I handed them the bill for their betrayal. The financial tide turned not with a crash, but with the quiet, digital hum of a server updating a database. 4 years after I started at Northbridge Signal Works, the company was acquired by a larger tech conglomerate because I had held on to my stock options, refusing to cash them out for vacations or cars like some of my colleagues. I suddenly found myself sitting on a nest egg that was no longer theoretical. It was liquid, it was real, and it was substantial enough to change the geography of my life. I remember staring at the number on my screen. It was a sum that would have made my mother choke on her Chardonnay. It was enough to pay off my student loans 3 times over. It was enough to walk into a dealership and buy a fleet of luxury cars. But I didn't want cars. I didn't want clothes. I wanted the one thing my family had always dangled out of reach: turf. I made an appointment with a fiduciary financial advisor, a man named Mr. Sterling, who wore bow ties and didn't ask personal questions. We sat in his office, which smelled of mahogany and old money, and we ran the numbers. "You are in a very strong position, Ms. Walker," he told me, looking over my portfolio. "You have 0 debt. You have significant liquidity. You can afford a substantial down payment without touching your emergency reserves. In fact, if you wanted to, you could buy a modest property entirely in cash." "I don't want modest," I said, leaning forward. "And I don't want flashy. I want invisible." I spent the next 3 months scouring the real estate listings around Lake Wylie. I didn't want the suburbs of Charlotte where the houses were stacked on top of each other like dominoes. I wanted distance. I wanted trees. I wanted water. I found it on a rainy Tuesday. It was a contemporary home tucked away at the end of a long gravel driveway. It wasn't a colonial mansion with pillars like the one Kelsey was pretending to own. It was sleek, modern, and comprised of glass and cedar. It sat on a bluff overlooking the water, surrounded by pines that whispered when the wind blew. It had a wraparound deck. It had a dedicated office with a view of the lake, a room where I could build my empire in peace. It had 3 bedrooms, which was too much for one person, but exactly enough for a woman who was reclaiming her space in the world. I made an offer the same day, but I didn't sign my name. I had learned my lesson from the credit inquiry. If I bought this house as Juliana Walker, it would be public record. My mother, who fancied herself an amateur investigator when she wasn't committing identity fraud, would find it. She would see the sale price. She would see the address, and she would show up on my doorstep with a suitcase and an opinion. I instructed Mr. Sterling to help me form a limited liability company. We called it Quiet Harbor LLC. The deed would be held by the company. My name would appear nowhere on the county registrar websites. To the outside world, this house was owned by a faceless corporate entity. To me, it was Fort Knox. The closing day was uneventful, which was exactly how I wanted it. There was no fanfare. There was no family dinner where I had to beg for approval. I sat in a conference room, signed a stack of papers about 2 inches thick, and handed over a cashier's check for a down payment of $200,000. I kept a mortgage for the remainder, simply to keep my liquidity high for investments. But the monthly payment was less than 10% of my monthly income. It was effortless. When the title agent handed me the keys, she smiled. "Congratulations. It is a beautiful spot, heavy on the privacy." "That is the best feature," I replied. I drove straight to the house. It was late afternoon, and the sun was beginning to dip below the tree line, casting long golden shadows across the water. I pulled my Honda into the driveway. It looked almost comical parked in front of such an elegant structure, but I didn't care. That car had carried me away from Ohio, and it had carried me here. I walked up the steps and unlocked the front door. The heavy wood swung open silently. I stepped inside. The house was empty. I hadn't moved any furniture in yet. The hardwood floors stretched out before me, gleaming in the twilight. The living room had a wall of windows that framed the lake like a living painting. I walked to the center of the room and just stood there. I listened. I heard the hum of the refrigerator. I heard the faint lap of water against the dock down the hill. I heard the wind in the trees. What I didn't hear was criticism. I didn't hear my mother asking why I wasn't wearing makeup. I didn't hear Kelsey bragging about a vacation she put on a credit card. I didn't hear my father's passive silence. I heard the profound, heavy sound of ownership. I took off my shoes and walked in my socks to the spot that would be my office. I pressed my hand against the cool glass of the window. "I did this," I whispered to the empty room. I didn't say it with arrogance. I said it with relief. I had done it without their money. I had done it without their advice. I had done it while they were actively betting against me. A headlight's beam swept across the living room wall an hour later. I wasn't scared. I knew who it was. There was only one person in the world who had the coordinates to this location. Tara walked through the front door carrying a large pepperoni pizza in one hand and a red toolbox in the other. She stopped in the foyer, her eyes scanning the high ceilings, the open concept kitchen, and the view of the lake. She let out a low whistle. "Okay," Tara said, kicking the door shut behind her. "You didn't just buy a house. You bought a sanctuary." "It has a dock," I said, smiling. "I don't have a boat, but I have a dock. We can sit on it and drink wine," Tara said, walking over to the kitchen island and setting down the pizza. "This place is incredible. Jules, it's grown up. It's real. It's mine," I said. "Every nail, every plank." Tara opened the toolbox and pulled out a bottle of champagne and 2 plastic cups she had snagged from a gas station. "I figured you didn't have glasses yet." We sat on the floor of the living room, eating pizza out of the box and drinking expensive champagne out of plastic cups. The sun went down, and the moon came up over the water, painting the lake in silver. "So," Tara said, wiping tomato sauce from her lip, "when do we tell the Wicked Witch of the West?" "We don't," I said. Tara paused. "Ever." "Not until I'm ready," I said. "And maybe not even then. Mom thinks I'm struggling. She thinks I'm living in a shoebox. Let her think that. She's going to lose her mind when she finds out." Tara chuckled darkly. "She's going to try to take credit for it. She'll say she taught you how to save." "She can try," I said. "But the deed is in an LLC. She can't look it up. She can't drive past it. She doesn't even know what state the money came from." I took a sip of the champagne. It was crisp and cold. "I made a rule, Tara," I said, looking out at the dark water. "I call it the gatekeeper rule. If you made me feel small when I was building this, you don't get to stand in it now that it is built. If you mocked me when I was saving, you don't get to enjoy the spending. This house isn't just property. It's a boundary." "So Kelsey is never coming here," Tara stated. "Kelsey wouldn't understand this place," I said. "It's too quiet. There's no audience here. She'd hate it." "She'd hate it because it's nicer than hers," Tara corrected. "And because you actually own it." We sat in comfortable silence for a while. It was the first time in my life I felt truly settled. My mother had harped on that word for years. Settled. She meant married. She meant trapped. She meant distinct and palatable. But this was settled. This was the feeling of sinking roots into soil that I had chosen. I spent the next few weeks moving in slowly. I bought furniture that I liked, not what was trendy. I bought a deep leather armchair for reading. I bought a massive oak desk for my office. I bought high thread count sheets. I didn't post a single photo on Instagram. I didn't update my Facebook status. I didn't tell a soul at work. I was hoarding this happiness like a dragon hoarding gold. Every time my mother called, I answered from my deck, looking out at the sunset. "How are you, Juliana?" she would ask. "Still in that little apartment?" "Yes, Mom." I would lie smoothly. "Just working hard." "Well, you should try to get out more," she would say. "Kelsey is having a barbecue next weekend. She bought a new grill. It cost $2,000. "That sounds nice," I would say, watching a heron land on my dock. "She wants you to come," Mom said. "It's a housewarming party, a real one. She wants the whole family there." I felt a twinge of irony so sharp it almost cut. Kelsey was throwing a housewarming party for a house that was drowning in debt, a house she had tried to use my credit to refinance. I was sitting in a house worth nearly $750,000, and I wasn't even telling them I had moved. "When is it?" I asked. 2 weeks from Saturday. Mom said, "You really need to make an effort, Juliana. Kelsey feels like you've been distant. She wants to show off the place. She's worked so hard on the decorating." "I'll be there," I said. "Good," Mom said, "and try to dress up a little. Maybe not those gray sweaters you always wear. Kelsey is going for a garden chic vibe." I hung up the phone. I sat there for a long time, the silence of my beautiful, secret home wrapping around me like a blanket. I thought about the envelope I had prepared, the one with the credit inquiries, the one with the evidence. I had been building a sanctuary, but they had been building a trap. I realized that the party wasn't just a barbecue. It was the scene of the crime. It was where the illusion of Kelsey's success was going to be paraded around like a golden calf, and I was going to be the one to tip it over. I stood up and walked to the railing of my deck. The air was crisp. I breathed it in deep. "I'll come to the party," I said to the night, "but I'm not coming as the poor sister anymore." I went back inside and locked the heavy door of my fortress. I had a dress to buy, and I had a bomb to deliver. The secret of my success was sweet, but the revelation of their lies was going to be necessary. My quiet empire was built. It was time to go to war to protect it. The garden chic barbecue at Kelsey's house was less of a casual gathering and more of a coronation ceremony disguised as a potluck. The suburban Ohio sun was beating down on the manicured lawn, which looked suspiciously greener than the neighbors' yards, likely due to a lawn care service Kelsey definitely could not afford. There were balloons tied to the mailbox in shades of champagne and blush pink. A professional photographer, some poor college kid Kelsey had probably promised exposure to instead of payment, was circling the patio, snapping candids of my sister laughing with her head thrown back, holding a glass of rosé. I parked my Honda down the street to avoid ruining the aesthetic of her driveway, which was currently occupied by the leased Range Rover and my parents' SUV. When I walked up the driveway, wearing a simple linen dress I had bought on sale, I felt like an undercover agent entering enemy territory. "Juliana," Aunt Linda shrieked from a lawn chair, waving a skewer of grilled shrimp. "You made it." "We were just taking bets on whether your car would survive the trip from North Carolina. It made it just fine, Aunt Linda," I said, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Well, grab a drink. Honey," she said, leaning in with that conspiratorial whisper that always signaled an insult was coming. "So, Darlene tells me you are still renting that little apartment in the city. That must be cozy." "It works for me," I said. "Oh, I'm sure." She nodded, her eyes full of a thick, syrupy pity. "Not everyone is ready for the responsibility of homeownership. Look at what Kelsey has done here. It is just breathtaking. A real investment." I looked at the house. It was a cookie-cutter box with vinyl siding, but Kelsey had draped fairy lights everywhere to distract from the lack of landscaping. "It's very nice," I said. "Don't worry, sweetie," Linda patted my arm. "Your time will come. Maybe you'll meet a nice man who can help you get settled. It's hard doing it alone on a single income." I took a sip of my iced tea to hide the smirk threatening to break through. If only she knew that my single income had just purchased a $750,000 waterfront property in cash reserves. If only she knew that my little apartment was a memory I had already moved out of. But I held my tongue. The secret was my power, and I wasn't ready to discharge the weapon yet. The party dragged on. Darlene was holding court by the grill, telling everyone how Kelsey had personally designed the patio layout she hadn't. It was standard builder grade. Kelsey was floating around in a white sundress that looked bridal, accepting compliments as if she had cured a disease rather than simply signed a lease agreement. Around 4 in the afternoon, the heat became oppressive. I needed ice, and more importantly, I needed 5 minutes where I didn't have to listen to my uncle explain why cryptocurrency was the future. I slipped through the sliding glass door into the kitchen. The air conditioning was blasting. A welcome relief. The house was cool and quiet compared to the noise outside. I walked toward the refrigerator, enjoying the silence. Then, I heard voices coming from the dining room, just around the corner. It was a harsh, whispered argument, the kind where the volume is low but the intensity is screaming. "I cannot keep doing this, Kelsey," my mother's voice hissed. "I had to pay the penalty for early withdrawal. Do you understand? That was from your father's retirement account." I froze. My hand hovered over the freezer handle. I stepped back, pressing myself against the wall next to the pantry. "Mom, stop panicking." Kelsey's voice whined. It was the petulant tone of a teenager, not a 30-year-old homeowner. "It is just a bridge loan. I will pay you back as soon as the brand deals start coming in. I have 3,000 followers now. It's exponential growth. Followers do not pay the homeowners association fees." Darlene snapped. "You are 3 months behind. Kelsey, they sent a letter threatening a lien. A lien on this house. If the neighbors find out, we will be the laughingstock of the development. I told you. I sent the check. Kelsey lied. I could hear the lie in the wobble of her voice. It must have gotten lost in the mail. The check bounced. Kelsey. Darlene's voice cracked. The bank called me. You are maxed out. The Amex is maxed. The Visa is maxed. You spent $4,000 on patio furniture. Are you insane? I needed it for the party, Kelsey shouted in a whisper. How does it look if I have a housewarming party with folding chairs? You told me appearance is everything. You said I had to look the part. I said look the part, not bankrupt us, Darlene said. I heard the sound of a chair scraping against the floor, as if she had slumped into it. Your father is going to kill me. I moved $10,000. Kelsey, $10,000. If he looks at the statement, he won't look. Kelsey dismissed her. Dad never looks. There was a silence. I stood there, my heart hammering against my ribs. It was worse than I thought. They weren't just struggling. They were underwater, and they were drilling holes in the hull of my father's future to keep Kelsey afloat. Then, Kelsey spoke again, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. Look, Mom, I have an idea. We just need to get through the next few months until the yoga studio takes me back or the blog takes off. We have no more credit. Kelsey, my score dropped 40 points because of the car cosign. What about Juliana? My name hung in the air like a poisonous gas. What about her? Mom asked, sounding weary. Use her name for a line of credit. Kelsey said, just a small one. Like 5,000? She has that perfect credit score, right? She's a nerd. She probably has an 800. She never uses it. She just sits in that apartment hoarding her pennies. We tried that with the mortgage modification. Kelsey, the bank needed more verification than I could give. It got flagged. So try a different bank, Kelsey urged. Or a credit card. Just open a card in her name. Put me as an authorized user, and I will pay the minimums. She won't even notice. She lives in another state. By the time she figures it out, I'll have paid it off. I don't know. Darlene hesitated. She didn't say no. She didn't say that is illegal. She didn't say that is your sister. She said, I don't know. She was weighing the risk of getting caught against the risk of Kelsey's failure. Mom, Kelsey pressed, do you want me to lose the house? Do you want Aunt Linda to know I failed? Juliana doesn't need the credit. She's not buying anything. She's a spinster. Let her be useful for once. I didn't stay to hear the rest. I couldn't. I felt a wave of nausea so strong I had to cover my mouth. It wasn't just the theft. It was the contempt. To them. I wasn't a human being with rights. I was a spare battery. I was a spinster, whose only purpose was to be harvested to preserve Kelsey's vanity. I backed away slowly, stepping softly on the laminate floor. I went back out the sliding door, blinking in the harsh sunlight. Juliana, Aunt Linda called out. Did you get your ice? No, I said, my voice sounding strangely calm, detached from the fire burning in my chest. I just remembered I have a deadline, a work thing. I have to go. On a Saturday, Linda tutted. See, this is why you're single. You work too much. Tell Mom I had to leave, I said. I walked down the driveway, past the balloons, past the Range Rover that was destroying my father's retirement, and got into my car. I drove for 2 hours before I stopped. I pulled into a rest stop, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The credit inquiry from Buckeye Harbor Lending hadn't been a mistake. It hadn't been a glitch. It was a trial run, and hearing them discuss it, hearing my mother consider doing it again, shattered the last microscopic fragment of loyalty I had for them. They weren't my family. They were parasites. I drove the rest of the way to Lake Wylie in a trance. When I unlocked the door to my house, my real house, my paid-for house, I didn't feel the usual peace. I felt the cold, hard need for justice. I called Tara immediately. Come over, I said. Bring your laptop, and bring wine. What happened? Tara asked. Did they make fun of your shoes? They are planning to commit identity theft. Again. I said. Tara arrived in 30 minutes. We sat at my dining room table, which was now covered in papers. Okay, Tara said, her face grim as she typed on her keyboard. We are going to lock this down so tight that if they even whisper your social security number, A siren goes off at the FBI headquarters. We spent the night building a fortress of paperwork. First, we double-checked the freezes on Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax. They were active. Second, I signed up for a premium identity theft protection service that scanned the dark web and public records daily. Third, we created a timeline. I opened a spreadsheet. Column A date, column B event, column C evidence. I logged the email from 3 years ago where Mom asked for my social. I logged the date of the Buckeye Harbor inquiry. I logged the conversation I had overheard today, transcribing it as best I could from memory. "Why are we doing this?" Tara asked, pouring me a glass of Cabernet. "Why not just call the cops now?" "Because," I said, looking at the spreadsheet, "if I call the cops now, it's my word against theirs. Mom will cry. She'll say I'm jealous. She'll say I'm making it up because I hate Kelsey. I need them to trap themselves. I need the paper trail to be undeniable. You want to catch them in the act." Tara realized, I want to be holding the smoking gun when the smoke is still rising. I said. That night, after Tara left, I sat in my office overlooking the moonlit lake. I pulled out a piece of stationery. I picked up a pen. I wrote a letter to my mother. It was a letter I knew I would never send, but I needed to write it to get the poison out of my blood. Dear Mom, you asked me when I would settle down. I wanted to tell you today that I have settled into the truth. The truth is that you don't love me. You love the idea of a family, but you only love the parts of it that reflect well on you. Kelsey is your mirror. I am your shadow. You feed the mirror, and you try to step on the shadow. I heard you today. I heard you debating whether to sell my financial future to buy patio furniture. You didn't defend me. You calculated my worth. I want you to know that the Bank of Juliana is closed. Not just the money, the emotional currency, the attention, the validation. It is all closed. I am not your resource. I am not your backup plan. I am a stranger who happens to share your DNA. And if you try to use my name one more time, I will not call you Mom. I will call you defendant. I signed it. I folded it. I put it in the drawer of my desk. The rage was gone. It had been replaced by a terrifying calm. I knew what was coming. Christmas was 4 months away. It was the Super Bowl of the Walker family performance season. They would all be there. The aunts, the uncles, the cousins. Kelsey would be there, desperate to maintain the illusion of her success as the walls closed in. Mom would be there, trying to hold the crumbling facade together with lies and retirement funds, and I would be there. But this time, I wouldn't be the quiet girl washing dishes in the back. I wouldn't be the punchline. I looked at the folder on my desk labeled Buckeye Harbor Dispute. I added the notes from today into the folder. Go ahead, I whispered to the empty room. Ask me when I'm going to settle down one more time. I turned off the lamp. The darkness of the room was comforting. I wasn't hiding in it anymore. I was waiting in it, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't dreading Christmas. I was looking forward to it. The silence that followed the sliding of the envelope was not empty. It was heavy, pressurized, and vibrating with the kinetic energy of a bomb that had just been armed. The dinner table, moments ago a cacophony of chewing and forced laughter, was now a tableau of frozen expressions. I looked at my mother, Darlene. Her hand was still raised in that mock toast, the wine glass tilting slightly, catching the light of the chandelier. The smirk was still plastered on her face, but her eyes were darting back and forth, trying to process the glitch in her carefully curated reality. I already did, I said again, my voice cutting through the stagnation like a razor. You already did what? Kelsey asked, her voice shrill. She had lowered her fork, and a piece of roasted potato fell onto the white tablecloth, leaving a grease stain that she didn't even notice. I settled down, I said, leaning back in my chair. I didn't cross my arms. I didn't hunch. I occupied my space with a calmness that felt foreign in this house. I bought a house 2 years ago. It is a 3-bedroom contemporary on a bluff overlooking Lake Wylie. It has a wraparound deck. It has a dedicated office with floor-to-ceiling windows, and most importantly, the deed is in my safe, not the bank's. Darlene lowered her glass slowly to the table. She blinked. Once, twice, Her brain was rejecting the data. It didn't fit the narrative. Juliana was the struggling one. Juliana was the lesson. Juliana was not the homeowner. "Don't be dramatic, Juliana," Darlene said, letting out a short, breathless laugh that sounded more like a cough. "We are having a nice dinner. There is no need to make up stories just because you feel insecure about Kelsey's success. It is pathetic." "It's not a story, Mom," I said. "And I'm not insecure. I'm indifferent." "You're a liar," Kelsey spat across the table. Her face was flushing a deep, ugly red. "You live in that dumpy apartment complex in Charlotte. I saw the address on your Christmas card last year." "I have a P.O. box," I corrected her gently, "because I learned a long time ago that giving this family my real address is an invitation for unsolicited opinions and solicited loans." "Stop it," Kelsey slammed her hand on the table, making the silverware jump. "You are just jealous. You see this beautiful house, you see how happy I am, and you have to invent some fantasy life to compete. A waterfront house. With what money you answer phones for a computer company." "I am a senior data architect," I said, "and I bought it with the money I saved while you were buying validation." The insults were flying now, predictable and boring. Darlene looked at the relatives, her eyes pleading with them to see me as the villain. "She always does this," Darlene said to Aunt Linda. "She ruins every holiday. She has to be the center of attention. Juliana, apologize to your sister for lying." "I'm not lying," I said. "Then prove it," Kelsey screamed. "Show us a picture. Show us anything besides your big mouth." I didn't reach for my phone. I didn't need to. Tara stood up. The sound of her chair scraping against the hardwood floor was loud. Tara had been quiet all dinner, nursing her wine, waiting for her cue. Now, she looked at Darlene, then at Kelsey, with a look of pure, unadulterated exhaustion. "She isn't lying," Tara said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of absolute truth. "I've been there. I helped her move in. I've sat on that deck. I've drunk champagne in that kitchen. It is real, and it is twice the size of this place." The air left the room. If I had said it, they could have dismissed it. I was the black sheep. I was the liar. But Tara was the neutral party. Tara was the observer. Tara didn't play their games. Darlene stared at her niece. "Tara, you knew." "For 2 years," Tara said, crossing her arms. "And it killed me not to tell you, but I respected her privacy, which is more than anyone at this table has ever done." The dynamic shifted instantly. It went from mockery to confusion, and then, inevitably, to victimhood. Darlene's face crumpled. She put a hand to her chest, clutching her pearls as if she were having a cardiac event. "You hid it," Darlene whispered, looking at me with wet, wounded eyes. "You bought a home, a major life milestone, and you hid it from your own mother. How could you be so cruel? We are family. We celebrate each other." "Do we?" I asked. "Of course we do," Darlene cried, her voice rising. "Look at this party. Look at how we celebrate Kelsey. We would have celebrated you too. Why would you keep such a secret? What kind of daughter does that? The kind of daughter who learned that good news is only welcome here if it doesn't outshine Kelsey," I said. "That is not true," Kelsey yelled. "You are just selfish. You wanted to hoard it. You wanted to sit there and judge us while we tried to include you." "I hid it," I continued, ignoring Kelsey and locking eyes with my mother. "Because this family only remembers me when they need a loser. You need me to be the failure so Kelsey looks like a success. You need my apartment to look small so this house looks big. You need my silence so you can hear your own applause." "That is a hateful thing to say," Darlene said, shaking her head. "I have done everything for you girls. I have sacrificed everything." "You sacrificed your retirement fund for Kelsey," I corrected her. "You didn't sacrifice anything for me." "I treated you equally," Darlene insisted. "No, Mom, you didn't." I leaned forward, my hands clasping together on the table. "When I was 18, I asked for help with tuition for a top-tier university. You told me it was too expensive and I should be realistic. That same year, you bought Kelsey a brand new car because she was anxious about taking the bus." "That was different," Darlene stammered. Kelsey needed reliable transportation. When I was 22, I went on, ticking the points off on my fingers. I needed a co-signer for my first apartment. You said no. You said I needed to learn independence. 2 months later, you paid Kelsey's rent for a year because she wanted to live in a loft she couldn't afford. She was finding herself, Mom argued. And just 3 months ago, I said, my voice dropping lower, darker. I heard you in the kitchen at the barbecue. I heard you talking about how you pulled $10,000 out of Dad's 401k to pay off Kelsey's credit cards because she bought patio furniture for a party she threw to impress people she doesn't even like. A gasp went around the table. My father, Mark, looked up from his plate for the first time. His face was gray. He looked at Darlene, then at Kelsey. You told me that money was for a medical bill, Dad said, his voice raspy. Not now, Mark, Darlene hissed at him, then turned back to me with venom in her eyes. You are petty. You are bringing up old history to hurt your sister. You think you are better than her because you have some money. Money isn't everything. Juliana, family is everything. Do you think I'm better than you? Kelsey sneered. Is that it? You think because you work some boring desk job and hoard your cash that you're superior? You have no life. You have no friends. You're cold. I don't think I'm better than you, Kelsey, I said. I just decided to stop playing the game where you get to be the star while Mom pays for the lighting, and I get to be the audience who pays for the ticket. I worked for everything I have, Kelsey screamed. Tears were streaming down her face now, ruining her makeup. I am building a brand. I am an influencer. People look up to me. You are drowning, I said simply. And instead of throwing you a lifeline, Mom is pulling everyone else down with you. She is burning Dad's future to keep you warm for 5 more minutes. You are ruining Christmas. Darlene slammed her fist on the table. I will not have this. Get out. If you are going to sit here and attack your sister and lie about your life, you can leave. Go back to your imaginary lake house. I'm not leaving yet, I said, because I haven't finished explaining why I slid this envelope across the table. I picked up the envelope again. It felt light in my hand, but I knew the weight of what was inside. You asked me why I hid my life, I said. I hid it because I knew that if you knew I had money, you wouldn't be proud. You would feel entitled to it. You would see my success as a solution to Kelsey's failures. We would never ask you for money, Darlene scoffed. We have plenty. Do you? I asked, because that inquiry on my credit report says otherwise. The color drained from Darlene's face so fast, it looked like a physical blow. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Kelsey stopped crying mid-sob, her eyes widening in genuine terror. They knew. In that split second, the performance dropped. The garden chic facade, the proud mother act, the successful influencer mask, it all fell away, revealing 2 terrified women who had been caught with their hands in the cookie jar. I didn't think it was a mistake, I said to the silent room. When I got the notification from Buckeye Harbor Lending, I didn't think it was a computer glitch. I knew immediately that you were trying to open a line of credit in my name. Juliana, wait, Darlene said, her voice trembling. She reached a hand out across the table, a gesture of peace that was 20 years too late. Let's not discuss this here. Let's go to the kitchen. Just us girls. We can talk about this. No, I said. We are going to talk about it here, in front of everyone, in front of Dad. It was a misunderstanding, Kelsey blurted out. We were just checking rates. We weren't actually going to do it without asking you. We were going to surprise you with an investment opportunity. An investment opportunity where I am the co-borrower on a house I don't own. I asked, where I am liable for the debt but have no claim to the asset. We would have paid it, Darlene insisted. It was just for a few months, just to get over a hump. You have such good credit. Juliana, you weren't using it. It seems silly to let it go to waste when your sister needed help. It's illegal, Mom, I said. It's fraud. It's family, she shrieked. How dare you use legal words against your own blood? We were trying to save this house. You were trying to steal my identity, I said. And the only reason you didn't succeed is because I was one step ahead of you. I looked at the envelope. I looked at my sister, whose house of cards was collapsing in real time. I looked at my mother, whose manipulation had finally hit a wall it couldn't climb over. "But that's not the worst part," I said softly. I stood up. I smoothed the front of my dress. I felt light. I felt clean. "The worst part isn't that you tried to steal from me," I said. "The worst part is that you felt entitled to it. You thought that because I was the quiet one, because I was the settled one, that I wouldn't fight back. You thought I was weak." I tapped the envelope on the table. "And there is one more thing," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that echoed in the silent dining room. A detail that I found when I was pulling the records for the police report. Something that makes this whole family-first argument really interesting. I looked directly at Kelsey. "It's about the reason I had to lock my credit in the first place." I opened the envelope. My hands were steady, a stark contrast to the trembling wine glass in my mother's hand. I pulled out 3 sheets of paper, stapled together in the top left corner. They were crisp, clean, and devastating. "This," I said, my voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel, "is a formal record of a hard credit inquiry initiated by Buckeye Harbor Lending on October 14th at 3:42 in the afternoon." I placed the paper in the center of the table, turning it so my mother and sister could read the text. "And this," I pointed to the second line, "is the IP address from which the application was submitted. I had my security team trace it. It matches the residential IP address of this house, 1242 Maple Ridge Drive." Kelsey made a noise that sounded like a strangled cat. She reached out as if to grab the paper, but I placed my hand firmly over it. "I wouldn't," I warned her. "This is a copy. The original is currently attached to a sworn affidavit of identity theft that I filed with the credit bureaus and my attorney." The word attorney hit the table with the force of a physical blow. "Attorney," Darlene whispered, her face draining of the last remnants of color. "Juliana, you got a lawyer involved against your family." "I got a lawyer involved to protect my identity," I corrected her coldly. "I didn't know who was trying to steal from me. I just knew someone was." I locked my credit files. I placed a fraud alert on my social security number. That means if anyone tries to use my name to open a credit card, a loan, or even a utility bill, the police are notified immediately. I looked at Kelsey. She was shaking now, her eyes darting around the room, looking for an exit that didn't exist. "It was a mistake," Kelsey squeaked, her voice an octave higher than normal. "I told Mom it was a bad idea. I mean, I didn't mean to. We were just testing the system. We didn't actually sign anything." "You submitted the application, Kelsey," I said. "That is the crime. Attempted wire fraud. Attempted identity theft. Do you know what the penalty is for that in Ohio? It isn't a slap on the wrist. It is prison time." "Prison," Darlene shrieked. She stood up, knocking her chair backward. "You would send your sister to prison over a credit score. Have you lost your mind?" "I haven't lost anything," I said, standing up to meet her eye level. "But you are about to lose everything if you don't stop lying to me right now." The room was spinning in chaos. My aunts and uncles were staring at their plates, terrified to breathe. The illusion of the perfect Walker family had not just cracked. It had shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. Then came the twist that none of us saw coming. My father, Mark, stood up. Dad had been a piece of furniture in our lives for as long as I could remember. He was the wallet, the driver, the silent observer who drank his beer and let Darlene run the show. But tonight, he looked different. He looked old, and he looked furious. "Sit down, Darlene," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it was heavy. It was the voice of a man who had been carrying a load for 40 years and had finally decided to drop it. "Mark, tell her," Darlene pleaded, grabbing his arm. "Tell Juliana she is being hysterical." "I said sit down," Dad repeated, shaking her arm off. He looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw respect in his eyes. Not love, necessarily, but respect. "I knew," Dad said. "You knew what?" I asked. "I knew something was wrong," he said, looking at Kelsey with profound disappointment. "For months, the mail has been disappearing, bank statements, credit card offers. I thought the post office was losing them. But last week, I found a stack of them in the trunk of Kelsey's car when I was moving it to get the mower out, Kelsey gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. They were unopened past due notices, Dad continued, his voice trembling slightly. For cards I didn't know we had, for loans I didn't sign for, he turned to Darlene. You told me you withdrew that $10,000 for a medical procedure, he said. You told me you had a scare. I was worried sick about you. I stayed up nights praying you were okay, and you gave it to her. He pointed a shaking finger at Kelsey. You gave my retirement to buy patio furniture. I was trying to help, Darlene sobbed. She is our daughter. She was going to lose the house. She can't afford the house, Dad roared. It was the first time I had ever heard him yell. She never could. We have been lighting money on fire to keep her warm. Darlene, and now she is trying to steal from Juliana, from the only one of us who actually has her head on straight. I didn't steal, Kelsey screamed. I was going to pay it back. I am an influencer. I have potential. You have debt, Kelsey, I said, stepping into the silence left by my father's outburst. You don't have potential. You have a delusion. I looked at the three of them, my mother, weeping in her chair, my sister, defiant and terrified, my father, broken and waking up too late. Here is what is going to happen, I said. I felt like a judge passing a sentence. I am not going to press charges today. I am not going to call the police and have you arrested in front of the neighbors. Darlene let out a sob of relief. Oh, thank God. Thank you. Juliana, I knew you were a good girl. I'm not doing it for you, I cut her off. I'm doing it because I don't want to spend the next year of my life testifying in court. I have a business to run. I have a lake house to enjoy. I don't have time for this. I picked up the envelope and the affidavit. However, I continued, this file stays open. My credit remains frozen. If I see one single inquiry, one single unauthorized charge, one piece of mail that looks suspicious, I will file the report, and I will not hesitate to name both of you as co-conspirators. We won't, Dad said. I'll make sure of it. And there are consequences, I said, looking at Kelsey. You can't afford this house. Kelsey, the gig is up. You need to sell it before the bank takes it. And Mom, you need to stop enabling her. If you touch Dad's retirement fund again, that is elder abuse, and I will report that too. You are ruining my life, Kelsey wailed. You are jealous because I bought a house and you didn't. You are trying to humiliate me. I didn't ruin your life, I said calmly. I just turned on the lights. The mess was already there. Juliana, please, Mom wept. It's Christmas. Can't we just eat and pretend? No, I said. That's what we've done for 29 years. We pretended Kelsey was the star. We pretended I was the failure. We pretended you were a good mother. The room went dead silent. I'm done pretending, I said. I have a real life now, a real home, and in my home, we don't steal from each other. I turned to Tara, who was watching me with a look of fierce pride. Are you ready? I asked her. I've been ready for an hour, Tara said, grabbing her purse. I walked to the door. I didn't look back at the table. I didn't look at the relatives who were gaping at me. I walked past the beige walls, past the fake garland, past the live, laugh, love sign that hung crookedly in the hallway, at the front door. Darlene caught up to me. She grabbed my arm. Her eyes were desperate, wild. Juliana, you can't just leave, she hissed. What will I tell people? What will I tell the family? Tell them the truth, I said. Or lie? I really don't care anymore. You have changed, she said, accusingly. You used to be so sweet, so quiet. Now you are cold. I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had taught me that my worth was conditional, who had tried to harvest my credit score like a crop. I'm not cold, Mom, I said gently. I'm just settled. But you're not settled here, she cried. You're not settled with us. Exactly, I smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had given her in years. I settled down. Mom, I just didn't settle down in the story you wrote for me. I wrote my own. I opened the door and walked out into the cold night air. The wind bit at my cheeks, but it felt cleansing. I got into my car. Tara jumped in the passenger seat, and we drove away. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. The aftermath was swift and silent. The family group chat, usually buzzing with Mom's updates about Kelsey's achievements, went dead. No one posted, no one commented. It was a digital ghost town. 2 weeks later, I heard through a cousin that Kelsey had put the house on the market. It was a short sale, meaning she was selling it for less than she owed just to escape the crushing debt. She moved back into my parents' basement. The influencer career was quietly retired. My father took control of the finances. He put Darlene on a strict allowance. It wasn't a happy ending for them, but it was a necessary one. They were finally living in reality, however grim it was. 1 month later, on a Tuesday evening, my phone rang. It was Mom. I stared at the screen. I knew why she was calling. The dust had settled. The bills were coming due, and she was going to try just one more time to see if the old button still worked. She would ask for a small loan. She would say it was for Dad. She would cry. I let it ring. I watched the name flash on the screen until it went to voicemail. Then, I blocked the number. I wasn't being cruel. I was maintaining the perimeter. I walked out onto the deck of my home. The sun was setting over Lake Wylie, painting the water in strokes of purple and gold. The air was still. The only sound was the gentle lapping of the waves against my dock. I sat down in my chair, wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, and took a sip of tea. This was it. Revenge wasn't screaming. It wasn't burning their house down. It wasn't destroying their reputation online. Sweet revenge was sitting on a deck that I owned, looking at a view that I paid for, with a peace of mind that they could never touch. They were trapped in a prison of their own making, frantically trying to keep up appearances, drowning in debt and lies. And I was free. I took a deep breath of the pine-scented air. I had settled down. All right, I had settled into a life where I was the main character, and for the first time, the script was perfect. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I know family can be complicated, but I hope my journey reminds you that you never have to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Are you tuning in from the busy streets of New York, the sunny coast of California, or maybe somewhere halfway across the world? Please leave a comment below letting me know your location and what you thought about how I handled my family. And if you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to Maya Revenge Stories. Hit that like button to support the channel, and smash the hype button so we can share this story with even more people who might need to hear it. Stay strong, and keep building your own empire.